The blizzard carved through the empty wilderness like a blade, sending ice crystals dancing against wooden shutters and seeping through every crack in the settlement's defenses. White powder blanketed the desolate landscape, muffling all sound beneath its frozen embrace. The settlement of Willow Creek, hardly more than a handful of weathered buildings, crouched low against the prairie, featuring little more than a few structures. A lockless jail and Murphy's Tavern, where the liquor burned fierce as the hearth. Fire and dark secrets traded hands like gambling chips. Samuel Hayes arrived as twilight painted the sky purple. Ice clung to his weathered coat after 4 days of hard riding, and his eyes carried the weight of 4 years' worth of sorrow. He hadn't planned to stop, but the trail of his missing horse led here. And something deep in his bones whispered that tonight would reveal more than just stolen livestock. He secured his mount outside the tavern, snow dusting his boot spurs. Inside, heat struck his face like a slap, bringing with it the mingled sense of tobacco, perspiration, and something more acrid hanging in the thick air. He navigated past mumbling drunks and tilted tables. As he approached the bar, fragments of hushed conversation drifted from behind a warped door labeled supplies. He stopped to listen. Murphy, the tavern keeper, and quietly the man who traded in human flesh. "You certain she survive?" Another voice responded, cold and calculating. "She's breathing. Lost plenty of blood, but delivered the infant." Stubborn little creature kept muttering about sterile rags and hot water, even while in agony. Murphy let out a harsh laugh. "Physician's child. Someone mentioned she was trained to preserve life. Fortunate if she keeps her own." "Sure." "Asking price?" the buyer inquired. "Half ounce of gold? Previous customer offered that, but I reckon she's worth more while fresh." Silence stretched. Then Samuel stepped through the doorframe. The floorboards protested under his weight. Both men whirled around. Samuel's expression remained stone cold, but his voice cut like winter air. "I'll pay twice that amount." Murphy blinked hard. "Twice. But she and the infant come with me immediately." The other man snorted. "What in hell you want her for, a stranger? Putting her out of misery?" Samuel's gaze never wavered. "No, I'm purchasing her freedom to live." Murphy hesitated. He exhaled sharply. "Done." Samuel dropped a leather pouch onto the table. Sound of gold coins silenced everything. Minutes later, Murphy led him up groaning stairs down a corridor reeking of decay and old despair. He paused at a door hanging crooked on its hinges. "She's inside, still losing blood from what I can tell." Samuel pushed the door wide. Within, candlelight wavered against the walls. The chamber smelled of iron and tears. A young woman lay curled in stained bedding, barely covered, her complexion ashen, her breathing labored. Blood had soaked the mattress center. In her embrace, wrapped in torn fabric scraps, a newborn mewled softly. She clutched the child as though, even unconscious, her body understood not to release its grip. Samuel moved closer. He removed his hat and felt something fracture inside his chest. Knelt beside the bed without touching her, simply observing. His throat tightened. He glimpsed his wife's face in a flash, the same sweat-dampened brow, the same terror, the same stillness that followed. Screams held too long. Behind him, Murphy scoffed. "You sure about this? Ain't nothing but blood and bones in that one." Samuel rose slowly and faced the door. "I didn't come to purchase a commodity," he said, voiced gravelly. "I came to grant someone another sunrise." Then he shut the door, and the snow continued its descent. She didn't wake initially. Only the bitter cold confirmed she remained among the living. It clung to her bare shoulders, to her damp skin, to the places where blood had dried and hardened. Her breath came in shallow, fractured waves. Nearby, a newborn whimpered quietly, as if apologizing for existing. Margaret didn't remember losing consciousness. She only remembered gripping tight enough to prevent the child from falling, from slipping away like everything else had. Now, senseless, her arms encircled him with desperate instinct. No one had placed the baby in her arms. She had managed it herself. 7 hours earlier, she had delivered her own child. No midwife, no assistant, No clean linens, just a dirt-stained blanket and screams muffled by brothel walls too busy to care. Her father would have wept, witnessing her there. Dr. Matthew Bell had taught her everything he knew. From age 10, she had accompanied him through freezing nights to deliver babies in sod houses and candlelit farmsteads. She understood how to halt hemorrhaging, how to detect breech presentation, how to calm a laboring mother with gentle hands and soothing voice. She had delivered 15 babies by age 18, but never her own, never alone. Never in a bed bought and sold like livestock. She had trusted the wrong person, Mayor, Davidson's driver, who promised generous payment for assisting the mayor's young bride through difficult labor in Millfield. She remembered packing meticulously, scissors boiled clean, Eileen rolled tight, medicines wrapped in waxed cloth. She remembered falling asleep in the carriage. She remembered awakening in an unfamiliar town with bound wrists, her mouth parched, and burning from whatever they had forced down her throat. Then came the negotiations, the leering stares, the realization that no rescue would come, that the mayor would never acknowledge hiring a doctor's daughter through unofficial channels, that her father's reputation meant nothing here. They stole everything, her supplies, her dignity, her identity, but they couldn't steal her knowledge. She knew how to keep her body functioning, how to breathe through contractions, how to feel for the baby's crown, how to push at the crucial moment, even when her legs trembled, and the room spun with fever. She remembered it all, even as her body tore open and consciousness faded. When it finished, she pressed her child to her chest and whispered, "You survived. Mother kept you safe this time." No one brought water, no one brought cloth. The madam. Then they closed the door. She drifted between sleep and waking, lost in agony and hunger, and that terrible silence of being consumed before she could. I used to hold their hands and promise the pain would end. I used to believe birth meant beginnings, not endings. Tears leaked from her closed eyes, though she never fully awakened. Her body felt simultaneously empty and full, and she no longer remembered how to pray. The child whimpered again. She tightened her hold. "You won't be alone. Even if I die, I'll die holding you." She didn't hear the door opening. She didn't see the man enter, his hat pressed against his chest like a funeral token. She didn't see how long he stood watching her breathe, watching the child move against her breast, but she sensed something shift in the atmosphere of presence unlike the others. Not hungry, not cruel, something different. A pause, a promise not yet spoken. Her lips parted, dry and cracked. No words emerged, but in her sleep, her hand opened slightly, just enough to reveal the baby's tiny fist nestled in hers, and Samuel Hayes, standing in the doorway, felt something quietly break in his chest. She had saved the child. Now someone had to save her. Samuel remained silent when the door closed behind him, stood momentarily in the dim light, snow still melting from his coat. The room was scarcely warmer than outside. The candle on the bedside table flickered as if ready to surrender. The woman, Margaret Bell, though he didn't yet know her name, remained motionless, except for the slight tremor in her arms as they cradled the baby. Her hair stuck to her forehead in damp strands. Her face, flushed with fever, held the hollow look of someone who had been too brave for too long. Samuel stepped forward carefully, like approaching an injured animal. "I won't harm you," he said softly, more to the silence than to her. She didn't stir. He knelt, placed his hand near her shoulder without touching, and carefully examined the baby, still breathing, skin mottled but warm. Samuel pulled off his gloves and set them on the table. Then, with the gentleness of someone who had once held something precious too late, he unfastened his coat, stepped close to the bed, and laid it across her shivering form. Margaret stirred. Her eyes fluttered half open, cloudy with fear. She saw a man above her, a stranger. Her cracked lips parted. "Please don't." Samuel froze. Then quietly he said, "I'm not here for that." She tried to push herself upright, but couldn't. Her arms weakened. Panic flashed behind her eyes. Samuel stepped back, raising his hand slightly. "I paid to get you out," he said. "That's all." She blinked. It made no sense. No one ever paid unless they wanted something, especially not a man. He saw it in her face, the confusion, the suspicion. Why? she rasped. Samuel looked down. Because my wife died in a bed just like this, he said, and no one came for her. She stared at him. He turned, found a dented kettle, filled it with water from the basin, and set it on the small iron stove near the wall. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out a tin wrapped in cloth. Chamomile leaves, dried. His wife had loved the taste when nothing else could comfort her. He crushed some between his fingers and dropped it into the heating water. A tale of redemption in the Dakota Territory. February 1876. As the gentle scent filled the air, he retrieved a small cloth and placed it beside the kettle. Then a bottle, old but clean, filled with clear liquid. Antiseptic, he murmured, setting it beside the cloth for the bleeding. She was watching him now, eyes glassy but tracking his every movement. He turned back to her. Drink when it cools, slowly. Still she didn't respond. He sighed, then moved to the room's far corner. There was a wooden chair near the door, old and creaky. He sat down slowly, placing his hat on the floor beside his boots. He didn't look at her again. The candle flickered lower. Outside the wind howled against the glass, but inside the only sounds were the soft bubbling of chamomile tea, the barely audible breathing of a woman and her child trying to survive the night. Samuel leaned, head against the doorframe, and dozed sitting up, gun still strapped to his chest, boots still on, hands open, threatening no one. He had paid double and walked away. The room was dark. Candle had long since died, leaving only the dim orange glow of embers pulsing faintly in the stove's belly. Shadows curled across the floor like sleeping cats, and the air had turned cold again. The kind of cold that sank into bone and memory. The child had stopped crying and now breathed in soft, fragile sighs against his mother's chest, his tiny fists curled near her skin, as if still inhabiting the world he had only just left. Samuel shifted in the wooden chair, his neck stiff from too many hours upright. One boot scraped gently against the floorboard as he stirred. His revolver rested, undisturbed. At his side, untouched since he entered, his coat hung from a nail on the wall, drying slowly from the snow. Outside, the wind had quieted, but snow still fell, a silent curtain of white under the pale light of a winter moon. Inside Margaret's mind, something shifted. She woke not with peace, but with panic. Her first breath was shallow and ragged. Her body ached from within. Every muscle and bone screamed as her nerves tried to decide whether to move or shut down completely. Her arms locked tighter around the baby, as if someone might tear him from her. Then her eyes opened into the darkness. She saw the man slouched by the door, a silhouette against the dying embers. Her heart jumped. She remembered his voice, the gold, the way he looked at her. She remembered being sold. She remembered every hand that had touched her without permission. Every time someone said quiet when she screamed, every deal made without. Her name spoken. Then she heard her father's voice, ghostly but firm, echoing from some distant childhood winter. If no one comes, you protect yourself. Her body tensed. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. Only her hand moved, slow and practiced. It slipped beneath her sleeve, fingers searching for the last sharp thing she still on the sewing needle, curved and small. Hidden in the hem before she had ever entered that place of blood and shame, her fingers closed around it like a lifeline. With effort, she rose. Every joint was fire. Her knees wobbled, and her vision blurred. But the baby stirred and whimpered, reminding her whom she had to protect. 3 silent steps, each one deliberate. Samuel heard the creak too late. She lunged, the needle pierced his shoulder just below. The collarbone, deep enough to draw blood, sharp enough to make him grunt. He grabbed her wrist not harshly, but firmly, like catching a falling cup. Enough to stop the second strike, not enough to bruise. Their eyes met in the darkness. Hers wide, wild, brimming with fury and terror. His soft, tired, and profoundly sad. He didn't retaliate. Instead, he slowly released her wrist. I'm not here to hurt you, he said. She stared at him, panting. The baby began to cry again, startled by the jolt of his mother's heart. Samuel didn't move. He only raised his hand, touched the warm trickle of blood spreading across his chest, and said, "I came because I couldn't save the last one." The words hung there like breath in cold air. She blinked. "What?" she asked, her voice thin, scraped raw by too many screams. He looked away. "My wife," he murmured. "She bled out. I was there. I didn't know what to do. I froze. And then it was too late." Margaret's fingers slowly uncurled. The needle slipped free, clinking softly against the floor. "I couldn't let another woman die. In a room like that," he said. Then he stood slowly, as if even that movement hurt more than just flesh, and pulled a folded cloth from his coat pocket. He laid it gently on the nightstand for the baby, and without another word, he turned, walked back to the chair, and sat facing the door, his back to her. Not a threat, not a buyer, not a monster. It's just a man who had once lost everything. And for the first time in 7 months, Margaret Bell felt something unfamiliar stir beneath her fear. She was not alone. The storm had slowed to a whisper by the time Margaret woke again. Snow pressed soft against the windows, muffling the world in white silence. She stirred beneath the heavy coat, his coat draped over her body. The baby was gone from her arms. She jolted upright, heart thudding. Then she saw him. Samuel stood near the tiny stove, awkwardly holding the baby in the crook of one arm while pouring goat's milk from a tin cup into a cloth-wrapped bottle. His hands were clumsy, too large for such delicate work, but steady and focused that the child whimpered, rooting. Samuel crouched, balancing the baby with quiet panic. He tapped the cloth bottle on his wrist, testing the temperature like he had seen his sister do once, years ago. "You don't have to do that," Margaret whispered, her voice cracking. He looked up. He was hungry. She blinked back tears. "They usually are." Samuel nodded, then offered the bottle to the baby, who suckled greedily. He watched for a moment, then sat slowly on the bed's edge, far enough not to touch her. "He's strong," he said. "Has your spirit?" Margaret studied him, his posture, his hands, the dried blood on his shoulder. She had struck him hard, but he hadn't struck back. He hadn't spoken of it since. "You didn't sleep," she murmured. "I don't sleep much anymore." She nodded slowly, her hand drifting to her own abdomen, still raw with pain. A silence passed between them, filled only by the soft sound of suckling. Then Samuel spoke, his voice lower than before. "My wife's name was Catherine." Margaret didn't move. She was sunshine, kind, brave, used to sing even when no one was listening. We married during the war. She followed me into the territory, said she didn't want to raise children where cannon. Fire echoed. He paused. She got pregnant the 2nd year. Everything was fine until it wasn't. His eyes fell to the baby. It was early, snowed heavy that night, like tonight. I rode for help, but the nearest midwife was 40 miles south when I returned. He drew in a breath. She was on the floor. She'd bled out. Margaret's chest tightened. Samuel's voice cracked. The edges rough and unpracticed, like he hadn't told this to anyone, maybe not even himself. I just stood there. I knelt down, put my hand on her belly like maybe that would stop the blood. I begged her to stay. I didn't know what else to do. He looked away as if ashamed. I did nothing and she died. Margaret could barely breathe. She reached out, trembling, and took the bottle from his hand. Repositioning the baby gently, Samuel let her eyes still locked on the floor. "I learned to stop that kind of death," she said almost in a whisper. "That's why I followed my father. That's why I studied. I wasn't supposed to be this," her voice cracked. "I wasn't supposed to end up sold, bleeding, naming my child alone." Tears ran down her cheeks, silent and slow. "I studied to keep women alive, and I was treated like something disposable." Samuel turned to her, his face unreadable, yet in his eyes something shifted. Not pity, not shock recognition. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Margaret asked, almost without meaning to, "Do you believe in second chances?" Samuel looked at her for a long beat. "I believe in doing better than the last time," he said. She nodded, brushing a thumb over the baby's brow. Then finally, she looked at him not with suspicion, but with understanding. And he looked at her not as a burden, but as someone still alive, still fighting, still worth saving. 4 days had passed since Samuel carried Margaret and her newborn from that blood-soaked room. In the quiet of his cabin, surrounded by wind-bent pines and high-country stillness, they found something resembling peace. Samuel had patched the roof with new shingles. He spent mornings chopping wood and boiling water. Margaret learned the cabin's layout, where the clean cloths were kept, where the tea was stored, and which window let in the softest light for her child. They spoke little, but their silences were no longer sharp. They carried warmth like glowing coals beneath Ashdod. Every now and then, Samuel would catch her humming to the baby, or she would catch him watching her as if unsure she was real. They didn't speak of the past or future, but something was growing. Then came the knock, not loud, not frantic, just sharp, a single rap against wood. The kind of sound that made a man reach for his gun. Samuel opened the door slowly. A rider waited. Outside, coat heavy with ice, horse foaming at the mouth. The man handed Samuel a letter, glanced inside, and said, "Get her out now. They're coming." Samuel read the letter, his jaw clenched. The brothel in Willow Creek had been raided by federal marshals. The owner, desperate to save himself, claimed Samuel had kidnapped a woman from Kansas and was hiding her and a child. The description matched Margaret exactly. Samuel didn't curse. He didn't panic. He only said, "Pack light." Margaret watched him move across the room with measured steps, gathering supplies. "What's happening?" "They're hunting me," he said. "And if they find you with me, you'll be taken back, or worse." She stared at him, heart thudding. "So you're leaving?" "I'll draw them off. You and the boy can stay. No one knows this place but me." Front of him. "No, if they find me here alone, they'll call me a runaway, a whore, a liar again." She looked him straight in the eye. "But if I go with you, I'm not running. I'm choosing." Samuel stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. By nightfall, they were gone. They traveled light, Samuel's mare. 1 sack of food, a bundle for the baby, and a rifle slung across his back. Snow fell in waves, erasing their tracks faster than they could make them. But it wasn't enough. By the second night, they heard the distant thunder of hooves, faint but closing. "We have to split," Samuel said. "I'll take the horse. You go east on foot. There's a ravine hide there. I'll find you." "I'm not leaving. Do it for the baby," he said. "I'll find you." She wanted to fight, but she knew he was right. He kissed the child's forehead gently, as if it were his own. Then he rode off into the night. Hours passed. Margaret crouched beneath a rock ledge, arms wrapped around her son, listening. When she finally moved, it was because her breath caught at the sound of a single shot. She ran. She found him near dawn. He had collapsed near a frozen creek, blood soaking through his shirt. A bullet had grazed his upper back deep enough to wound, shallow enough to survive, but only if treated. She dragged him inch by inch to a narrow cave hidden in the hillside. Her hands trembled, but her training returned like muscle memory. She ripped cloth, cleaned the wound, began stitching with thread pulled from her own sleeves. She sewed the wound closed with tears running down her face. He never screamed by morning. His fever broke. He opened his eyes to see her asleep beside him, arms still wrapped around the baby. He coughed. She stirred. Their eyes met. Samuel's voice was barely a whisper. "You're free now. You don't owe me anything." She shook her head. "Slowly, I know." He swallowed hard. "You can leave. Find your own life. No one would blame you." She touched his face, rough and bearded, still burning with fever. "I'm staying." He blinked. "Why?" "Not because I owe you," she whispered. She leaned closer, her forehead brushing his. "But because I believe you can love." For the first time in years, Samuel closed his eyes not out of pain, but to keep the tears in. And in that frozen cave, with only snow and silence outside, the two of them lay still, wounded, cold, and no longer alone. They rode into the dusty streets of Millfield, Kansas at first light a few weeks later. The plains had given way to rolling fields, and the horizon glowed pink through the morning haze. Samuel led the mare gently. The baby bundled in Margaret's arms under a worn blanket. Each hoofbeat felt like a promise and a risk. Millfield bore the quiet. Bustle of a frontier town, a small square with weathered windows, a lone sheriff's office, and a building that had once brimmed with hope but now stood empty. It had been here, Margaret's letter said, that Mayor Davidson had hired her in secret to assist his ailing wife. It was also here that people remembered her as a quiet doctor's daughter until she vanished. They approached the mayor's office. Margaret walked up to the desk, stepping carefully, cradle held tight. She handed over a letter, handwritten, and watched as the mayor's brow furrowed. He read. Then he peered at her, face shifting from disbelief to sorrow. You were real, he said. Softly, I'm sorry. He signed under oath that he had paid her, that she had performed her duty honorably. She was never a victim of her own misdeeds, but of deception. That was one piece. Next came evidence from Sarah. Sarah, the girl who survived the brothels. Cruelties because Margaret had helped deliver her child 3 years before. She had tracked them down. She came forward, trembling, but certain. She handed over her savings. Torn pages from the brothel's ledger written in Murphy's shaky handwriting, naming prices and clients. Dates. Enough to expose years of trafficking. Falsified. Records. Lies. Samuel and Margaret waited as the sheriff reviewed them, then looked up with quiet determination. Soon, Samuel was taken to the small jail, cuffed temporarily for questioning. The townspeople gathered, curious, confused. Rumors swirled. Was he a kidnapper or a hero? In the courtroom, really only a hastily cleared saloon, they assembled. Margaret entered with the baby, taller now, held close in her arms. She took a deep breath, looked at Samuel's eyes, across the open space, and walked to the center. I was not kidnapped, she said, voice steady. Today I was betrayed, sold, and this man, this quiet wounded man, gave me back what I almost lost. That's turned. Heart stilled. She handed the mayor's affidavit to the sheriff. Then Sarah stepped forward to show the ledgers. Then the sheriff himself read the charges against Murphy filed that morning, then swept his gaze toward Samuel. The judge, an older man with kind eyes, rubbed his chin, looked at Samuel, then at Margaret, then delivered a calm verdict. Samuel Hayes was innocent. Samuel Hayes acted with the only power he had, love. And Murphy, brothel owner, trafficker, deceiver, would face justice. His establishment would be shut, his license revoked, his ledger evidence handed to the federal marshals. A hush fell then, erupted into murmurs that turned into applause. Women, some carrying infants, some with their own scars visible, began to weep and clap. Men nodded, some removed hats. A few offered coins, food, a place to rest. One burly farmer approached Samuel. You saved her, he said. You saved her and that baby. Samuel shook his head, eyes glistening. I don't want payment, he said quietly. Only hope there will be a place where kindness doesn't cost a price. At the doorway, Margaret released a breath she didn't know she was holding. She looked at Samuel, whose expression was both worn and relieved. And she knew in that moment they had crossed a threshold, from fugitives running toward safety to people who had stood and claimed it. They walked out into the light together. No handcuffs, no frowns, just a mother with her child, and a man who had chosen mercy over vengeance. And the prairie wind blew through the open street, carrying with it the scent of snow melt, wildflowers, and the first real dawn of justice won. A year later, spring came slowly to the plains, but it came. The snow melted into the grasslands, and wildflowers bloomed in fierce colors yellow. Purple, blood red, like the land refused to stay gray any longer. Near the edge of a hill, where the wind blew soft and the sky stretched wide, a small wooden structure stood alone. It was not a church, not quite a home. But the women who came called it something else, the place that did not judge. A single-room cabin with whitewashed walls and wide windows. It was the first medical outpost within 60 miles. Inside, everything was simple. Clean cloths hung in rows. Jars of dried herbs lined the shelves. A cot stood near the far wall, beside it a small wooden crib. In the center of it all stood Margaret Bell, her sleeves rolled up, her hands moving with quiet purpose. She stitched a young woman's shoulder, humming as she worked, steady as ever. The girl, barely 17, winced but didn't cry. "You're safe now," Margaret said, voice soft. "That's the last stitch." She tied it off, cleaned the wound, and stepped back. From the door, a tall man watched, silent as always. Samuel carried a basket of wood under one arm, his shirt damp with sweat. He nodded to the girl, gave a quiet smile, then turned toward the back to check on the roof repair. Every day was like this. Samuel worked the land. Margaret healed the broken. The boy, now with legs strong and wild, ran between them like sunlight between trees. "Papa," he called, chasing a chicken through the grass. Samuel lifted him with one hand and tossed him over his shoulder. The boy giggled, clutching his father's neck. No one asked if Samuel was the real father. No one needed to. They saw it in the way he stood between the child and every shadow. In the way Margaret looked at Samuel when he thought she wasn't looking. There were no rings, no declarations, just the kind of love that needed no words. One afternoon, a traveling doctor from the east passed through, gray-haired, sharp-eyed. He had heard whispers of a wild prairie healer and came to see for himself. He stood in the doorway, watching Margaret bandage a woman's wrist. "You live out here?" he asked, surprised. "I do." With him, he tilted his chin toward Samuel, who was fitting a new beam to the side wall. "I do." The doctor raised a brow after everything. Margaret glanced at Samuel. He was kneeling in the dirt, hammer in hand, his shirt stained with dust and time. She smiled. "After everything," she said, "we are no longer two people surviving." She turned back to the doctor and said simply, "Now we are a family." Outside, the child laughed again. The wind danced through the grass.
Ice.
And for once, in the vast wild of the frontier, peace was not a thing lost in stories. It was here. It was now. It was theirs. And so, from blood-soaked sheets and broken silence, something rare was born. Not just a child, but a kind of love forged in the quiet spaces between pain and mercy. Samuel never asked for redemption. Margaret never asked to be rescued. But together they chose something stronger than survival healing. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories do not begin with a kiss. They begin with a choice to stay. If this tale stirred something within you or reminded you that hope can bloom in the harshest places, remember that every story of mercy begins with someone choosing to see another's worth. In the quiet spaces between cruelty and kindness, love finds its way.